All right, I'm trying to listen to you with my earpods. Tell me how my
Oh, oh, can you hear me? Can you hear me? You can't hear me? Can you hear me
but
now?
I was my earpods.
Oh, well, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can. Oh, okay. That
Okay.
was it.
I
Okay.
look a little pixelated on my side.
Not
How are
at
you?
all.
Okay, good.
You don't look pixelated at all.
Good.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, we are coming up in right in three, two. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It is a joy to be with you. I want to have a clinic on knowing your rights. The Chicago ICE raids are going to happen everywhere. People have been stunned because this happened in the middle of the city. It happened in the middle of the Black community. Many people did not expect that. And it was the manner in which it was conducted. I'd like for Attorney Tanya Woods, the executive director of the West Side Justice Center, to to really help us to go through the raid. And once we go through it, I want to then go back and look at what maybe is if there's anything anyone could have done. Um, we do know that parents were separated from their children. We do know that people were brought outside naked or barely dressed and barely dressed. We do know that people were humiliated. We do know that it wasn't just that building that was affected, it was the block, it was the area, because there was a Black Hawk helicopter that hovered above them. So you can imagine that the whole neighborhood was frightened. You didn't know what was happening. Thankfully, cooler heads prevailed and no one um, pulled out a weapon. Because if you hear that sort of thing happen, you don't know what's going on and you want to protect the people that you love. You want to protect your person. We need to talk about this. And now, in addition to these ICE raids that are now everywhere, we just had one of our guests in the last hour who said that when she goes to a church that has a predominantly Latino congregation, and ICE were all over the place, and they were walking up and down the street. She said, armed. Can you imagine in the United States walking up and down the street in military gear, armed? Think about that, everybody. Think about it. Think about it. Some people might feel safer. I don't know who. We had Reverend Dr. Marshall Hatch of the New Mount Pilgrim Missionary Baptist Church who said that, and he generally has a full congregation. He said it was actually more full than usual because people came scared today and they needed to know, what do we do? Because if it could happen in South Shore, which is historically a middle class Black community, you have some wealthy parts of South Shore, you have some middle class, some working class, but it's basically a middle class community. If it can happen there, they said it can happen anywhere. And it's happening to the Black community now, which is something that Attorney Tanya Woods told us would happen. She said, expect that. 20% of the migrants are Black. And so on Tuesday morning, in the middle of the night, uh, Mexicans, Venezuelans, and Nigerians were swept up. They were looking for everybody. Now, anybody here could fall into any of those categories. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about this military style raid, as Time magazine has put it. There's something about this that feels a little unusual. And indeed, Dr. LaShawn Latrice, community psychologist, said it's been unsettling for everybody. You know, in Chicago, we have a South Side, West Side thing. I never bought into it, but Black folks on the South Side feel some kind of way, and Black folks on the West Side feel another kind of way. Well, guess what? Everybody was from one side. One side. So I'm so glad that you were able to join us today because what you have been forewarning has come to fruition. And so, what happened around 1 a.m. Tuesday morning?
Yes, thank you, Santita. What happened was, and I'm from the West Side Justice Center, so South Side meets West Side. Good to be here. But what happened was, under the under a warrant, so-called warrant, the ICE agents, federal agents that are border patrol, as they are often sometimes called, in pursuit of a warrant for a particular person. They raided an apartment building in the Source Shore neighborhood. That apartment building had many, many families inside of it that were awakened in the middle of the night, as you so aptly described. One can only imagine how horrific it may have been after watching scenes of federal agents rappelling down the sides of buildings. It looked like something out of an action movie that you would watch late at night, but those people actually experienced it firsthand. The loud sounds of banging doors, the heavy boots and footfalls that they must have heard in the middle of the night, the doors being ripped off the hinges, and people coming out of their homes, being forced out of their homes and afraid, not knowing what was happening, who they may have been looking for, and if their apartment would have been next. And so the scene that you described is very accurate. What happened after is even much more disturbing, as you mentioned before, children being separated from their families and the adults that they know, loved ones being taken away to places unknown, only for us as attorneys and advocates fighting through ridiculous amounts of red tape to try to find and locate people's loved ones. It is truly a scene out of a dystopian novel or movie that we sometimes will watch for entertainment, which is now a present day fact. And so after that happened, then the network of well-meaning attorneys and advocates and mutual aid leapt into action in the Black community to work together to try to find out who was missing, who had been detained, where they may have been taken, countries of origin, if they were U.S. citizens or not, and then more importantly, how to support those families in the aftermath of such a horrific uprising in the middle of the night, wrested by what is supposed to be law enforcement agents keeping the community safe, which is what we were told over a month ago, is that the National Guard was coming to respond to people's outcries of the rise in crime and violence, when actually in Chicago we've seen a decrease in crime and violence because of a commitment and an investment to things like better mental health, better housing, better education, better social services so that people are better kept and taken care of. And instead, now we are seeing in our front doors, in our office places, in our places of worship, but that the law enforcement from the federal government is creating the havoc and the chaos and bringing the violence to our front door. And so that is what is most disturbing, is that we as citizens of Chicago, we are the ones that are feeling terrorized and unsafe, and not because of each other, but because of federal law enforcement now in our cities, running literally amok in our neighborhoods, and not just on the south side as we saw tragically in that apartment building, but in the days to follow, we saw raids across the city, but
Mhm.
specifically in Black communities. And not just in the middle of the night, but in broad daylight. We saw people snatched from their cars, being swept up, being choked out by law enforcement, even when there were firsthand accounts and videotape that were being presented. Our federal government was still saying to us, no, that didn't happen. You must be wrong. You did not see that. So we're not only seeing the actions taking place right before our eyes, but then we're being told that, as the song goes, who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes? We're told that we didn't see that. That didn't happen. So there's this 1-2 punch, if you will, of the actions being taken and then the propaganda that seeks to erase what actually is happening. So we must bear witness, but we also must continue to prepare ourselves and our families for what I know and believe is going to be more of this type of militant action by our federal government, not only in Chicago, because every day we are hearing troops are coming to Chicago, but other cities with large Black populations, as well as large immigrant populations across the country, are also, I'm certain of it, going to see this type of military action.
Attorney Tanya Woods, where are these people being taken to? We know that there have been deals that have been cut with South American nations, African nations to send people away. And we're hearing um, people, you just mentioned that folks are trying to find the people who have been swept away, who've been swept up in these raids. Where are they taking them? Are they taking them to a holding area, an ICE facility? Are they taking them out of the country? Do we
I
know
wish I
what?
could give you easy answers, Santita, but there are no
We
easy
don't
answers
know.
to this. We don't know. And for what may be a situation for one individual may be something different for someone else. And so you have very aptly named that we're talking about immigrants from different countries of origin. We're talking about the pretense of the federal government sending law enforcement to seek out to enforce criminal warrants. But in that, it's like if you cast a net in the ocean and you're trying to catch up a dolphin, you're going to pick up about 1,000 minnows. So whatever the pretense is for who they are trying to seek out and find, they may pick up 10, 20, 30, 40 individuals trying to enforce a search warrant for one. And so you're not sure where people are being taken because first of all, the people that are being detained may or may not be the subject of the warrant. So they may go to one place. Then if indeed there is a legitimate warrant and that person is found, depending on what they are being pursued for and where they're coming from as far as their country of origin, they may be taken to yet another place. And so that's what makes this work so very difficult for us who are trying to serve as advocates and as legal supports is one trying to locate them, which is very difficult, but then trying to locate where they may have been taken once they leave Chicago. This may sound very familiar for Chicagoans and others who have lived in communities where our own local law enforcement has picked up people in the middle of the night off the streets, taking them to holding centers, and family members not knowing where they are. And so this is unfortunately a story that we have seen in the Black community many, many times before in the past. But I will say that in this moment now, people are better prepared because we are getting information out to help people keep their families safe. And I'd like to talk about that a little bit, but
Mhm.
also we are coordinated in a way that is very different and I think will make an impact because we were told that this was coming. And so now we are coming together in a much more organized fashion to make sure that people are safe. They know what their rights are. They know what their risks are when they're walking around the streets. But most importantly, they know what their resources are if they find themselves in the midst of trouble.
That having been said, before we get to that, I wanted people to get a sense of what happened. Uh, because I think that if we talk about what happened, it takes the surprise out of this, uh, out of this particular circumstance, out of this time in which we find ourselves. If you kind of know how things can go, it you're not surprised. We were surprised this time because this had not happened to us. Now, if we know Black Hawk helicopter, hundreds of agents, they don't knock they might knock on your door, they bust down your doors, and property has been destroyed. People have come back to their apartments over the past day or so, and they have seen that these rental units, that their property inside of the units were destroyed. Do they have any
Mm-hmm.
recourse, Attorney Woods?
So a couple of things there to unpack as far as the what happened. The warrant is the mechanism by which law enforcement can then search person or property, and that gives them, unfortunately, a wide berth to search your person, to search your home, your car, all of your belongings, and do it in such a manner that can be very disrespectful. It can be very humiliating. It can be destructive. It can be traumatizing, to say the very least. After that happens is the aftermath that we then have to put back together. But there is indeed recourse. And the recourse can take place in the courts of law, but it can also take place in what we do as citizens is trying to organize ourselves so that we can prepare for the next time. And so let's talk about a little bit about the legal recourse. And so there are a couple of things I'm going to unpack for a moment here to get us to that court of law of how we
Mm-hmm.
can protect ourselves and defend ourselves. There are two basic constitutional rights that everyone is afforded across this nation, and that is the right not to be detained, and if you are, by law enforcement, to have a lawyer. The other is the right to be able to refuse any searches that you believe are unlawful. And you don't have to figure it out. You don't have to decide in that moment, but you can refuse a search. And there are two very key ways to do that. The first thing is if you are detained by law enforcement, you do have the right to ask, am I free to go? I will tell you without a shadow of a doubt, rarely will an officer reply with, yes, you may go, or no, you may not go. What happens on the street is that you will probably be asked multiple follow-up questions. Somebody's going to tell you to calm down and don't get upset. Everything but a straight answer. But you need to know that you're right, and you can assert it is by asking if you're free to go. If you are not allowed to leave and walk away, then you must assume that you are being detained. And at that point, you must enforce your right to say, I will not speak without my lawyer. That helps us as attorneys later. So after an incident like 75th in South Shore Drive, after an incident like that, if you have enforced your right to not speak and not speak without a lawyer, we can use that later in a court of law to help defend you and to fight against whatever it is that you were picked up for. The second thing, and very quickly, is that you do not consent to any searches. And you simply just say, I will not consent to any searches. So whether that's your person, your car, your home, that allows us, again, your next constitutional right to then advocate for you in a court of law to say this person's home, person, or car was searched unlawfully. They did not have a valid warrant, perhaps, and this person did not consent to these searches. So that means anything that happens after that, that is retrieved in that search, can be what we call fruit of the poisonous tree. And so that means that you may not seek that same restoration of having all your things replaced in the way that you want, but you will have the opportunity to have the best advocacy and recourse in a court of law. But on a community level, you also have some hotlines that people in Chicago and across the state of Illinois can call if their homes have been disrupted in such a fashion that they need support and they need help in a very tangible way, restoring their home, their furniture, food and clothing for their family. There are resources here in Chicago and in Illinois that people can reach out to. And we have palm cards in Chicago and across the state of Illinois. On one half of that palm card are the rights that I've just described in very easy and simple language. They are available in different languages if English is not your first language. And on the back side are key hotlines that people can call to ask for help immediately in an instance when they have been the victimized or feel as though they have been victimized by any law enforcement, whether it's an ICE agent, local law enforcement, state law enforcement, because in this moment, anything goes and we don't know who's going to show up and when.
Hmm. What do you do if if they come in on you at 1 o'clock in the morning? Now do you? I mean, and they break down your door. Well, if they knock on
So
your
let
door,
me
you have the right not to open it, answer. I mean,
Yes.
what do you?
So let's talk about what that looks like in real time, Santita. The difference between what your rights are and how to enforce those in a way that keeps you safe and closest farthest away from harm is a in the moment call that you will have to make. And so you have the right to say if someone knocks on your door and does so in a way that is not knocking down your door, you have the
Mhm.
right to ask for them to ask for a warrant. And they have to either show you that warrant or slip it on the door. Most people are not going to know if that warrant is legitimate or not if they've never
Mhm.
experienced a warrant. So let's keep it real. Even if they did show you the warrant or slip something on the door, now you have to make an assessment as to whether or not are you at greater risk after you've been shown that warrant to open the door calmly and let the person in, that law enforcement agent that appears to be a law enforcement agent, or do you want to resist? And what we ask people is not to try to litigate in that moment. Don't try to be the hero necessarily in that moment, but enforce your rights as lawfully and as calmly as you can. That is not going to stop a law enforcement agent from being either rude or disrespectful or humiliating or to even knock your door down. But what it can do is offer us as legal advocates later an avenue for redress and for you to be able to fight lawfully for your rights in a court of law. And so something that may have happened unlawfully and illegally, we then have a chance to correct. So that's why I am continuing to enforce, and others like me, that you not only know how to know your rights, but also know what your risks are. If you are a person that's a re-entering citizen with a previous record, that's risky to resist. If you are a person that's a juvenile and you're under 18, that's a different kind of risk, because there are different laws that operate for juveniles that allow them to be taken up and held differently than an adult. If you are a person who knows that you are either undocumented or have undocumented people in your home, that's a different kind of risk. So we're asking people to assess what their risks are individually, as well as for the people that they care for, so that when they are enforcing their rights, they know what they're in for, and do so in a way that is as calm as the situation will allow you to, which allows you then to de-escalate even when the law enforcement agent may be escalating. And we know that this is kind of part of the game, and the dynamic is to sow seeds of chaos and confusion and disruption in communities where there may already be tension, or in communities where there is no tension, and bringing
Mhm.
tension to the table in order to incite people to react in a way that is histrionic, that is inflammatory, and that may actually put them in further danger and further harm.
Let me ask you about imposter agents, because that's something that is becoming a real issue all over the country. You have a lot of people who are posing as ICE agents. They're posing, and because people are on edge, you might have an expectation. Well, anyone can have an expectation now that anything could happen. But these agents are coming in and they're hurting people, they're harming people. But how do you identify who is an authentic agent?
So
I
this
mean,
is another
do
great
you ask them for
question.
identification? I mean, what do you do?
Couple of things that we're asking people to do, and I cannot enforce enough that you must know your risk when you are trying to deploy some of the things that I'm talking about right now. And so what we're also doing en masse in communities are, one, taking note of some of the uniforms that we're seeing that we're not accustomed to seeing, and sharing that information with our community members, so that if you've never seen a person from Border Patrol, that green military uniform may look very foreign to you, and it may just simply say in the back, Border Patrol. You may not know that that's actually ICE, because you've been hearing ICE your entire,
Hmm.
these last couple and several months. And then somebody shows up and it says Border Patrol. Well, that's the same law enforcement, but there may be others. There may be county law enforcement. There may be local law enforcement. What looks like local law enforcement in Chicago is going to wear a different uniform than what it looks like in Broadview, where there is a facility right now. So what we're doing is we are capturing images of the different uniforms that we see and that we know to be legal and lawful. But we also know, unfortunately, as you mentioned, Santita, there are a lot of imposter, uniforms that can be purchased. But let's deal in the reality that we know. We are sharing that information as it becomes available, but we ask people that are choosing to be legal observers. Attorneys can be legal observers, or community members that want to know how to lawfully and safely take down information that is going to be of use to others in the community. There are two things. One we call rapid response training, and that is training that any individual, you don't have to be an attorney, but anyone who feels as though that they are at low risk and they can do this type of observation, get rapid response training from a reputable organization. When you want to find out more, you can call the Westside Justice Center, where I am, at 773-940-2213. Santita also has some other hotlines and phone numbers that you can call. But rapid response training is something that is widely available in Chicago, and we're trying to make it more available across the state. But a couple of things you can do: you can record badge numbers, as you mentioned, name and badge numbers. If you are in a place where it's safe, and away from harm, you can record names and badge numbers, as well as a brief description or photograph of a uniform. And then you can pass that information to hotlines that are fielding phone calls, gathering information in a centralized way so that we can share with the community broadly what they should be looking for. But it also helps us as advocates be able to find and locate loved ones that may have been detained. But it also helps us prepare, because we are of the mindset that we keep us safe. The unsafe environment that we're experiencing now is not one that we brought to ourselves. It's one that's been brought to us by
Mhm.
federal law enforcement. It's the chaos that's being sown. It's the entertainment, the master theater that is very dangerous, unfortunately, in creating unsafe streets in Chicago.
If your building is rated, if you live in a building, or if your home is, well, should your behavior be different if you live in a building as opposed to a single family home?
So this is your behavior should be no different if it's local law enforcement or if it's federal law enforcement. Your behavior should be the same. Your rights are the same. I think what can sometimes frustrate folks is because these are people that we've never seen before. These are uniforms that we've never seen before. And now you're talking about apartment buildings or homes where there may be people that are neighbors, have been neighbors, but now you're more aware of, maybe my neighbor next door to me is some person that is from another country. And now you're concerned, is this an undocumented person that I need to be concerned about? I see one of your listeners has put something in the chat about the apartment building in Chicago. But your behavior should be the same. One, it should be calm. Two, you have to ask questions, and you have the right to ask a question. If your home, however, is being addressed or you're being stopped, as we saw and see a lot of folks in the Black community are often stopped, busted tail light, or some kind of traffic stop as a pretense to then search a person's car or to have them get out of the car. But your reaction should always be one of calm, but two, also stating simply, I do not consent to any searches. Santita, I cannot stress enough, that is not going to necessarily stop them from entering your home or stop them from searching your car or patting you down. But what it does do, it does allow us as legal advocates to have a stronger defense against this type of wanton and, you know, just disregard for humanity and decency and respect, but it allows us to fight against that in a court of law if people are enforcing their rights in the way that I've just described. And so if you find yourself where you're either stopped at a traffic stop or detained on the street while minding your own business, or if someone comes to your home or your apartment building, if it's they're ringing the bell or knocking on the door, you have the right to first ask to see a warrant and identification. And if that does not happen and your peace is disturbed and your home is still barged into by force, you can continue to assert your right to say, I do not consent to any searches. And that is your lawful right under the Constitution, and one that we as legal advocates can then defend in a court of law.
What does a warrant look like?
Oh,
I mean,
that's a good question. Oh, so we're figuring this out as it goes along, because I don't have a specimen to show at this time, and maybe we can do that at
mhm.
another time. But that can also look different because the law enforcement agents are different, right? And so the bodies that issue the warrants, a warrant has to be issued and then signed off by a judge. Here, when you're talking about criminal offenses in the state, what the warrants may look like when we're talking about federal, those are very different things that we may not have any experience with. But here's what I'm saying to our listening audience. I'm not trying to make folks a expert on what the warrant is, and I don't want folks to feel as if they have to litigate this at the door when they are being faced with law enforcement on the other side of that door. What I do want people to do is to be safe and be in a situation where they are calm. So if that door is knocked down, or if you are pulled out of your car, that you are doing everything you can to stay calm and to stay safe. And so you can ask for a warrant to either be put up to the glass if you have a window, or you can ask for it to be slipped under the door. It is then up to you to decide, but I would not ask anybody to try to stand there and try to figure out, is this lawful or not,
Mhm.
if you have every reason to believe that that is a legitimate law enforcement agent on the other side of that door, you can still simply state, and you should always state, I do not consent to any searches, whether there's the presence of a warrant or not.
We're talking with Attorney Tanya Woods, the executive director of the West Side Justice Center. You need to be in touch with them. Of course, we're going to be working with her at Rainbow Push because this is a real issue, I think, for everybody. Um, because now we have another layer. We have the National Guard. So as we're moving through our neighborhoods, as we're moving around downtown, you have the National Guard there. When you have all of these layers, and then the president is talking about sending the military, I don't know if he means the National Guard or the actual military. You, as a lawyer, would understand the Posse Comitatus Act in response to the Civil War, was it of 1878? We're not going to use the Army, our armed forces, for policing in the United States. But it seems that that's not what's going to happen here. The president in his speech last week before the Pentagon said, we've got the enemy within.
Mm-hmm.
I guess we are the enemy who are within these borders. How do you think that might impact? How will that impact? How should that impact our behaviors?
Yeah, so our behavior needs to remain the same as I've described. What's going to be interesting for us to watch, as you've just described, we have our federal government now coming in with military forces into states and into cities. What will be interesting is what that dynamic looks like between how far they will be allowed to go in what essentially is amounting to terrorizing our system, with our cities rather, without pushback, right? How long will they be able to continue to occupy the streets of our cities and to terrorize our citizens without then our own law enforcement pushing back and our own governments and seats of government pushing back and saying, you can no longer do this to our citizens? That is what I'm waiting to see what will happen, as
You think
far
that could happen?
as it could
Because
happen, right?
you could have, because because look, in normal times,
That's right.
the FBI and the
Right.
CIA and all these agencies have their internecine battles,
Yeah.
brother sister battle. That's what they have.
Yes.
But now we're dealing with something, and so
Yes.
not even something else. We're dealing with that, and we could see this play itself out on the ground because the National Guard, they're our neighbors. But who knows how the police might feel about this?
That's right. And we're in a moment, Santita, where what we've never seen before is we now have blatantly the federal government now deploying its own law enforcement against people, right? And so this is a moment that there are a lot of communities have
Mhm.
felt this way for a long time. There are a lot of Black communities that felt like their law enforcement was attacking them for a long time and now protecting them. But now we're seeing it on a federal level and
Mhm.
widespread in multiple cities. And that is what is so shocking now to so many, is like, we thought, like, we didn't know this was actually could be played out in our own communities. And
Mhm.
I think that's the part that is so disturbing, is because this is happening with our federal government now coming into cities with no apparent checks and balances, being allowed to run unfettered throughout our communities, and not just downtown, or but these are in our neighborhoods. This is where, as we say, we work, live, and play, where our children are, where we go to school, where we are trying to go back and forth to work. And that is what is so disturbing and so novel and so new. And so this is happening at the same time, while in Chicago, in our western suburbs, in Broadview, we have a whole facility where people are trying to protest against their very presence, to say, we don't want this facility in our neighborhood because it is bringing violence and chaos right to our community, where we didn't have that chaos before. And so Chicago is now fighting a battle, in my opinion, against not the forces of our own communities. We're not fighting against crime or violence that's being rested upon by our neighbors against us. We are basically trying to survive against the attacks from our federal government on us as citizens in Chicago. So what I want people to do is I want you all to know your rights first. I want you
Mhm.
to assess what your risk is by enforcing your rights and create a plan for you and your family that's going to keep you safe. But most importantly, I want you to know where your resources lie. And so those phone numbers and hotlines Santita has and will make available on her social media. And you can find that information at the Westside Justice Center on our website at westsidejustice.org, or you can call us for those palm cards to distribute in your neighborhood, in your communities, by calling us at 773-940-2213. On one side of that palm card are the rights as we've talked about them today, and on the flip side are hotlines that you can call if you see ICE activity, if you are aware of any law enforcement activity that does not seem like like it looks right, or it's terrorizing your family or your home or your neighborhood. There are hotlines that you can call if you are a veteran who has served and you have found yourself on the short end of this inaction. There are phone numbers that you can also call if you are an individual who has had a criminal background and you, for some reason, are afraid of what may happen to you and or your family, and you need support and need help. So there, as they say, we've got a hotline for almost anything in any situation, so people can get help, they can get answers, they can get know your rights training for themselves and for their communities, and they can also have access to rapid response training if they are interested in being an advocate in a different way to take down and observe and take information of some of the law enforcement agents that are now in various parts of the city, but especially in the Black community.
Well, take us through a training. I mean, Solomon Harris says, stay out of ICE way and let them do their job. And he said, you all should be charged for interfering with ICE's work. That's a point of view. What say you?
Yes, that's a legitimate, Solomon, we appreciate you chiming in. What I am
Mhm.
talking about is people knowing their constitutional rights. So in the same way that every public official and every government employee is enacting the job in the way that they are told to, every U.S. citizen has rights as I've described them under the U.S. Constitution. And I want people to know what their rights are. I want people to know that they should have confidence in enforcing their rights. And as I've said before, to know what your risks are in enforcing it so that you can stay safe and free from harm in whatever situation you find yourself in. But if you do find yourself in a dangerous situation or in harm's way, that you know where your resources are so that you can call and get help for yourself and for your family. So Solomon and I are not saying anything different. He is
Mhm.
advocating for government employees to do their job, and I am
Mhm.
advocating for citizens to know their constitutional rights and to be able to enforce them with confidence, but also safely. Because I am of the mindset that we keep us safe when we have the resources that are reinvested in our communities, social services, human services, better education, adequate housing, mental health services, adequate maternal health, then we have a healthy neighborhood. When we have healthy neighborhoods, then crime and violence go down. When crime and violence go down, is further proof that we can keep us safe.
What do we do when we see, um, well, ICE and now National Guard just walking in your neighborhood? I mean, we just got advice from another lawyer, Attorney C.K. Hoffler, of course, former
Mm-hmm,
president of the National Bar Association, your dear colleague and friend.
mm-hmm,
She said, keep your passport on you.
mm-hmm.
And that is, help me with that. And because many of us don't have passports, and now with the government shutdown, some people are working, some people are not, but certainly things will not be processed as efficiently as they would have been if government were working normally,
Yeah,
right?
so let's
So,
talk about that in identification, and let's just do a quick little one-on-one, and we'll talk about
mhm,
why that's important. Your driver's license, your state ID are issued by your state. You
mhm,
have taken some form of identification to your state official to demonstrate
mhm,
your identity and your residency, right? That's all that your state documents do for you. A U.S. passport, if you've ever held a job where you've been asked to document and prove your U.S. citizenship as well as your residency. Your U.S. passport is the highest form of identification that is a U.S. citizen that you can have. Not your state driver's license from Texas, not your ID card, not your real ID from maybe your municipality, but your U.S. passport, because it has now identified and verified your country of origin and your status. And now it has also verified your residency. That's what your U.S. passport does for you. And not having heard my colleague's comments, I would imagine that he is speaking to the fact that if you have that document on you, if you find yourself that you are moving around in a space that is risky for you, given your background, that document then becomes immediate proof if you are detained of your citizenship as well as your residency. And so I would totally understand why my colleague would encourage folks to now carry that. In the past, we have thought about a passport as being something that's needed for travel. And if you did not have the ability or the means to travel outside of the United States, why would you need a U.S. passport? I'm sure there are many people that have never would have thought that themselves, their ancestors, all were born on this land, but yet and still that they may be asked to demonstrate and to prove their U.S. citizenship. And so I'm not even suggesting that that's not bad advice. I carry my U.S. passport as well. And so certainly I have my children do the same who are adults. That's certainly not bad advice to have. I will say to people who are detained by law enforcement, the only thing that you are required, however, to reveal if you are detained is your name and your date of birth. You are not required to produce identification. So again, I would never speak without having heard my colleagues, the context of his remarks. However, I will say that under the law, if you are detained, only reveal your name and your date of birth if you feel that that will keep you safest. If, however, again, knowing your risk in that moment when tensions are high and tempers may be broiling, if it reduces your harm for you to produce that identification, then do what's going to keep you safe. And so that's why you hear me continually repeating the same basic information so people don't make it overcomplicated for themselves in that moment, and the same basic mantra of stay calm. We encourage people that if you are allowed to leave a scene and law enforcement allows you to leave, do not run. Seems very simple to say just walk away, but your running may then incite pursuit, and law enforcement pursuing you. Law enforcement pursuing you may turn that into something else. So if you are allowed to leave a scene, then do so calmly and walk away to the nearest place where you will be safe. And so that is the message we want to continue to say over and over again. If you'd like more information about anything that I've said today, please reach out to us at the Westside Justice Center at 773-940-2213. We can help people get supplies of palm cards. We can certainly connect people for community know your rights education, as well as rapid response information and training, as well as those hotlines on those palm cards. So please reach out to us at 773-940-2213 if you want more information and more resources.
What if you're a permanent resident? What if you are waiting on your citizenship papers to come through?
Yeah.
Just because a lot of people are not quite complete, right?
Yeah, so we are hearing and now in the news that those folks who are in the pipeline may be at risk. That even though you are on that pathway and you have checked all the boxes and you are compliant with your pathway to citizenship or permanent lawful residence, that may be in jeopardy. Santita, what we are seeing is everything that we knew yesterday may be changing tomorrow. And so we're so very grateful for you having this space to talk about these very complex issues. For people who are U.S. citizens, you may not even know that terminology. You may not even know that there are all these various layers that are less than full citizenship, but are on your pathway to citizenship. And rather than say, well, you don't need to worry about that, I appreciate you educating your audience about those different pathways. There's so many people that, however, are not on that pathway. But for people who are on a pathway to citizenship lawfully, even we are hearing that those pipelines may be clogged, they may be stalled, they may be delayed. So a track that you thought you were, a trajectory that should have taken a certain amount of time, that may be in jeopardy now. So I go back to us staying safe and knowing what our risks are. If you are one of those people, then I would strongly encourage you to act as if you are undocumented. And so, what do you have to do to reduce your risk? What would you have to do to reduce the risk of the people that you live with? And so, that may mean, changing up your basic routines as far as living and working and taking kids to school and providing for your daily needs. That means making sure that you have proper identification and that your family knows what your whereabouts are, what your routines are. So, in the event that you find yourself detained for some reason, that your family knows what's going on and that they know the right places that they can go and phone numbers they can call in order to get help so that they can activate the systems that are in place helping people in those situations. But that's a very, very good point, Santita. And for people who find themselves on those pathways, this is a moment to be vigilant. This is a moment to take extra precautions to stay safe. And this is certainly a moment to be sure that you have all of your documentation and that your family knows where your documentation is. And if you were seeking assistance from either legal aid or for an attorney, that you work out the best safety plan for you in this moment with your legal counsel.
How do you proceed if your children are citizens and you are not? And I mean particularly minors, because I'm understanding from people and reports, but primarily from people, that ICE have been deployed at the at Lowe's, at Home Depot,
It's
where you can
true.
hire workers. They're around schools. They're
It's
around
true.
churches
It's
where
true.
they believe said populations will be. But let's start with school
Yeah,
because
let's start with schools.
okay,
Everything, the places that you've just mentioned, and why are those places? Lowe's, Home Depot, big box, home improvement stores are often places where day laborers will be hanging around so that if there are contractors that want to do are working on a project, they often will have to go to one of these big box stores to get supplies. And so you will find in Chicago, and I'm sure across the country, that you might see a truck or a car or vehicle of some kind with day laborers. Those day laborers often can be immigrants who are looking for work to make a way for their families. And so those are places where we have seen up close and personal ICE agents deployed and creating, again, sowing seeds of confusion and histrionics that did not exist before they came to Chicago. But especially vulnerable are children and the families that they come from. Not only did we see in Chicago over the last several months to a year, but new arrivals coming to Chicago, being brought to Chicago from places in other parts of the country to find sanctuary and to find jobs and to find housing for themselves and for their family. But we've had people living in Chicago long before then as well. And so now you find people who may not have previously been afraid to send their children to school or to take their children to school, now keeping their children home. I received a report from a teacher just the other day who's asking and begging us to come out and do Know Your Rights workshops because she had several teachers who have chronic now absences. In one school I
mhm,
heard reported, about 10% to 20% of their children are not showing back up to school because their parents and families are afraid to take them to school. And so we're trying to provide as fast as we can community know your rights for those individuals and for the people who they are in community with. Not everyone that is at risk is necessarily a person that's not undocumented. As I go back to my example of a wide net, there is a wide net that's being cast. And while you may be trying to, under the pretense of serving a criminal warrant for one person, you may scoop up 40 or 50 looking for that one. Those are
yeah,
40 or 50 adults that have been ripped from their homes, that have been separated from their families and separated from their children. And so some of our agencies have a specialty in trying to help those particular group of families who may be at risk, small children, where there may be someone in their family that may be of risk of being detained, to be able to create a lawful plan for those children. But what you can do now in your own home is to have that conversation about who should take the kids to school, how you can prepare for their, if in the event the adult in the household is detained, how you can prepare for that child's life to be less disrupted than it would be if that person leaves. And if you need more information, I strongly encourage you to seek help from legal counsel. And you can call the Westside Justice Center for information and for referrals or for direct help at 773-940-2213. But we are, along our agency and others, are thinking about the children in this moment who are going to need the help and support of mutual aid organizations as a rapid response, but long-term legal help if indeed they find themselves in a situation where the adult that has been responsible for their keep and care is at risk or at risk of being detained. So
I
that
only have
help is available for those families.
Well, I only have a few more minutes left here, but I've got so many questions. But let me ask you this, because looking at the children, there were children who were left behind Tuesday morning. Um, their parents had been taken away. If you're in the neighborhood and you've seen these children, they might be playing with your children. Uh,
Yes.
do you take them in? What do you do?
So it's again, as I just mentioned, we have hotlines, those palm cards that I referred to
Hmm.
before, there are hotlines on the back of those cards. You can call one of those hotlines, the one that we are encouraging people to use more often. You can certainly call the Westside Justice Center at 773-940-2213. But our rapid response hotlines are First Defense Legal Aid and I.C.E, which is an acronym for Illinois Coalition of Immigrants and Refugee Rights. These two institutions are prepared to help individuals in that moment to be able to connect those families and those children that may have been where their homes have been disrupted. But for the neighbors who are looking on, if you are a person who feels as though you have low risk of being in a situation and being able to assist, then you can call those same hotlines and offer the kind of assistance that you think you may be able to have. Before you take in another child, or before you take someone's child or offer to take someone's child, these are families that must first consult with their attorney or legal aid to figure out what is best for those children in that situation. And for neighbors who want to help, I strongly encourage you call places like Westside Justice Center or I.C.E or the First Defense Legal Aid if there are other ways that you can help that can be of service to the families that you may be neighbors with, or of help to people that maybe you don't know but you would like to be a part of that solution. So some key ways that neighbors can help: one, offer community know your rights workshops to the communities where you live, where you go to church, your civic organizations. Two, pick up a supply or offer a supply of the palm cards that have the two constitutional rights that I've described on one side and the hotlines on the other. And the three, donate to your local Black organizations that are supporting mutual aid, community know your rights, and legal aid. Places like the Westside Justice Center, places like First Defense Legal Aid, and others that are supporting these efforts. Equity and Transformation, Chicago Black Voter Project. There are no shortage of community-based organizations that can use your help. And some of these organizations also offer rapid response training so that you can be trained lawfully and safely on the ways in which you can keep your community safe, because we keep us safe.
Before you go, is there anything you'd like for us to know in this moment? I certainly believe you should keep hope alive. And my brother said something that was Congressman Jonathan Jackson, who you were on the air with a little bit earlier today. He said, I don't want to use the term fight. I want to look at nonviolent resistance. Of course, we come from
That's
literally
your
down
legacy.
staff. That's it. But that is the revolution that changed America. The nonviolent resistance, and because people who use violence as their weapon, they don't know what to do with nonviolence, but to drop their weapons eventually. What do you want us to know in this moment from our behavior, how from knowing our rights to all, I mean, just even to getting in touch with you? What might have been unsaid today?
I think we've done a great job of saying a lot of the things that we need to say, but I will say this at this moment. This is a marathon. This is not a sprint. This is a long race that we are in right now, and this is a moment that we've seen before, but we are stronger together. Despite our countries of origin, despite our languages, the color of our skin, we are stronger together than we are apart. And once we have come together to fight in this struggle, in this moment, to push back and to resist, we will see more we will see more advances. We will see our families safer, and we will see what we are talking about when we say we keep us safe. So I'm encouraging people to band together, to ignore the differences that have been wrested upon us by the oppressor, and to double down on supporting your local agencies and your local organizations that are supporting children and families in your community. This is not a time to have a spirit of fear. This is not a time for us to, there are some folks who are saying, lock yourselves up. These are our homes, our streets, and our communities, and we keep us safe. Put relentless pressure on your public officials to continue to reinvest in human services, social services, adequate education, adequate housing, and adequate mental health. And where you see that being done, celebrate it and talk about it and share that. So that would be my message to people right now, as they're keeping themselves and their families safe, that we can do this much better together over this marathon than we can apart.
Well, how can we get in touch with you before you go?
You can find us at the Westside Justice Center at westsidejustice.org or at 773-940-2213. We offer community know your rights, legal representation, and advocacy. You can get those palm cards that we talked about and so much more by calling us at 773-940-2213. That's the Westside Justice Center.
Attorney Tanya Woods, the Executive Director of the Westside Justice Center. We thank you for the work that you are doing.
Thank you,
It is so
Santita, for the
neat.
platform.
Oh, it's the people's platform. There you go. Much love and many blessings to you. AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. God bless you, everybody.